Bob Weber hanging out with us today, talking about Scion, a product from DefendEdge, and this episode of Three Questions with 3i. So that's officially, I think, the official, the unofficial title. How many times can I air quotes before it's obnoxious? But the unofficial title of the podcast is Three Questions with 3i. And even though we'll probably have many more than three questions, it's an alliteration, so we're going with it. So thank you so much, Bob, for making time today. Very interested to jump into Scion. Yeah, absolutely. Very interested to jump into Scion and talk a little bit about what you guys are doing from a security perspective. Just real quick though, the way I've been talking about Scion is, data exfiltration prevention within 5 clicks or less. What in God's name does that even mean? And so you've got a very unique product that I think people are having a hard time classifying because you guys do so much. And it's a very important product. So I definitely want to dig into it a little bit. So I'll shut up and give you the floor and let you tell us a little bit, and then I'll interject with questions as we go. So without further ado, Mr. Weber, over to you.
All right, great. Well, thanks for having me again. I think that, that's a great key point, the data exfiltration, but it's so much more than that. So when you think of traditional security, it's usually perimeter based. It's putting up a wall, a fortress around all of your data centers, your environments. And, especially as we see now with COVID-19 going on and there's more of a larger remote workforce, we're pushing data out to end users, out to cloud. Our data is really a lot of places outside of our data centers. So the hard part is tracking, who has access to that, how they're accessing it, how they're using it, and securing all that information. So we take it from an identity-centric approach. We view everything from an identity. And so that way, we can see if people are exfiltrating data, what they're doing with the data, how they're accessing it, the different parts of the environment that, maybe they shouldn't be accessing, but they still have credentials to access that. So it's a great way to give a view of, you think of that traditional SIM or the traditional security model. This takes all of those pieces and it puts it all on the identity. So now you're viewing it from that individual, and you can really lock down what you're, whatever you're trying to protect, whether it's intellectual property, just making sure there's no theft. It really, meet compliance standards. It really depends on, what the needs are of your company, but it gives you that unique individual perspective.
Very cool. And so you guys you have you're really multiple products. You're a SIM, you're a store, you're UEBA. Technically, you can also be identity access management as well. I can go back and SIM being system information event management. SOAR is the security orchestration automated response. UEBA is the user encrypted behavior analytics. IAM is the identity access management. You also have a neural node network as well as a plugin if needed. So you guys are a lot. And when we talk about security at 3i, we look at it from a pretty comprehensive approach. There's really no silver bullet in the world anymore, especially when it comes to security. And so there's and you mentioned perimeter earlier, and I think for the longest time, communication was a perimeter. And then it went to the actual physical logging in was a perimeter, but now taking it one step further, like you personally, your identity is a perimeter of defense against data exfiltration. And it doesn't even have to be a bad actor of an employee or somebody that is doing something malicious. It can be a good employee that's had their credentials compromised. And as a result of that, and them being unaware, some really bad things can happen, which we saw with Marriott, which is unfortunately come out. You and I are both Marriott guys. We'll talk about that in a bit.
Our data's out there.
Still a Marriott guy. I love the company. These things do happen, unfortunately. But looking at that multi-pronged approach, email communication, your mobile device, threat defense against your mobile device, looking at all the management of that device as well, and then all the way once you get internally, how you can manage that. And I think that's why you guys are so unique, is because you really are so many products in one, and you are like the last line of defense if something happens. And so, like I said, we'll talk a little bit more about. We can mention what happened with Marriott in a minute, but you guys are a very key and crucial part of our security portfolio. So can you talk a little bit about what you guys have been able to solve with that, with being so many of those things?
Yeah, it's interesting because, we do wrap around the existing security infrastructure in there. So when they have firewalls and endpoint and all of those pieces, we still take those data points in, because what we do is we build that persona or that individual identity. And so we take the data points, but then we also take information about that individual, where they belong in the organization, what department are they in, what geographic location are they in. So we kind of build that overall general view. So that way, there's a lot of different use cases, whether it's, stolen or hijacked credentials. We talked about Marriott real briefly there. Those were 2 employees with valid credentials. Somebody stole their credentials. They came in and they were exfiltrating the data of 5.2 million users. Where it solves something like that is, one, we would right away pick up that those are assets that are not assigned to the individuals. They're not assigned to the organization. It's a different geographic location, and their behavior is anomalous.
So, so you're saying that, like, so in that example, my credentials get snubbed, or gets stolen, and then I'm doing something in a place that I've never done it before. So somebody's logging in as Reid in, like, whatever, a different country or a different location where I've never logged in to access that information before, that gets flagged.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. Yeah, we're looking at it from a geographic perspective as well. So if you're an employee that really should never be outside of accessing work information outside of work, or you live in Chicago and you're not really traveling for work, you're only going to be in Chicago. If suddenly you start logging in from California, we can either raise it as a flag, or we can, revoke the credentials depending on, the security measures you want to have in place. But, we're looking at it from where you're coming in at, because, if somebody then logs in from California, but then 5 minutes later logs in from New York, we know that's not possible. So right away, that sends off a red flag. There's something wrong here.
Absolutely, 100%. So I think one of my favorite expressions is how to eat an elephant. It's one bite at a time. And so because you guys are so, you are so large, I think probably maybe a good way to take it is to look at the various entities that you guys are, and then why they're important, and then also how they work in conjunction. I know we kind of covered a little bit just here at the very top, but do you want to talk about maybe like your typical SIM product? And I think, SIM has been rolled out in a lot of places, but unless you really enjoy looking at SIM logs, I think there's probably a better way to approach security and orchestration with like a SOAR or in concert with UEBA. So can you talk a little bit about SIM and maybe where some of that headache has been in the past?
Yeah, I think anybody that's dealt with a SIM knows some of the problems that you get with a SIM is what you're doing is you're looking at everything from a device level, and you're pulling in syslogs and data from all these devices, and then you've got it, and then you have to do a lot of customization to see exactly how you want to see it. I think there's a lot of breaches that we see that are out there that the information was in the SIM. They were in the logs, but there's nobody watching it 24/7, or, right. It wasn't set up properly, or it just got lost in all the noise. And so, unless you've got a 24/7 SOC, sometimes, having a SIM just creates a lot of noise. And so we took a look at that from how do we give you all that information, be able to nail it within 5 clicks or less. And then, hey, if something happens at 3 a.m, if you don't have a 24/7 SOC watching this, something happens at 3 a.m, can I raise an alert, or can I, take action? And so we wanted to build the system to drive simplicity and operational maturity into a company. The one thing, the threats keep increasing, but I don't think everybody's security budget is, matching the curve of the threat increase. So, how do we make these guys more effective at their job, and how do we make it more relevant? 95% of all breaches are caused by human behavior, and that's whether it's on purpose or by accident. And, that's one of the things we hang on. So with 95% of the breaches caused by human behavior, let's monitor the humans. And let's take a look at that. Instead of the devices, the dumb devices that are out there, let's look at the people, because they're going after credentials. They're going after, or, you're worried about a person that has legitimate access to get into sensitive data. So, are you making sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing? So there's a lot of different ways, that we help streamline that information and cut out the noise. And we really do, because we tie it at such a tight identity piece and where they're accessing, what they're allowed to access, their personal devices on the network. We reduce a lot of the false positives. So because it's such a granular view on what they're doing, it eliminates a lot of the noise.
So you had mentioned something about SIM as how it's typically rolled out, it's implemented. And I know you and I've talked about this a couple times offline, and also in meetings as well, but there's something that happens where, and you mentioned it's something at like 3 a.m, and you don't have a 24-hour SOC monitoring these things. A lot of companies can't afford those things, and a lot of even large companies. And I came my previous role before coming to 3i, I was at a very large organization, and they would probably not have rolled something like this out because budgets are constrained, even if you're in massive organizations. And so having a SIM rolled out and then having to have a team of people to look through those logs, it's not a very effective way to approach security. And there's also a lack of automation around that. And so as a result of needing more human touch, you have more human error. And that's another big piece of this. But there's an interesting story you were talking about. It was an example that if somebody did something on like a Friday night, for example, at 11 o'clock when everyone's basically home, even if you have SIM logs in place and you've got a really fantastic, rollout of how that's supposed to look, you're not going to catch that until Monday morning, probably until midday, when you've gotten through all of the SIM logs of everything that's happened over the weekend. So there's a significant advantage to having something like Scion, which is so many different products combined into one, working in concert together. I just want to make sure we didn't forget to talk about that. But do you have anything to add regarding like that type of a scenario?
Yeah, and I think, when you look to add, the orchestration and automation piece, a lot of companies don't have the developers on staff to do the work or to dedicate them to specifically to do that project. So, one of the key things is now, if you have all the information in place, we can deploy in about 4 hours. Now there's obviously some longer poles in the tent there because we've got to pull some different, data sets and work with different people to put it together, but the automation is built in there. And so when we create the rule sets, you don't have to do any custom developments. You don't have to hire any consultants to come in and do this. We have a nice, simple installation package where you can come and build it. We can build the rule sets with you, set it up, and then you've got that automation in place. So it really simplifies the process. And it's, the way I look at it is we've taken thousands and thousands of hours of development and consolidated it into a quick delivery, easy package. Now, do we solve all the problems in the world? No, but we deliver a large percentage of the safe nets and put them in place to help secure the company. So, when eyes aren't on it 24/7.
Yeah, sorry, I was muting a phone call. Apologies for that. I think it always happens during these things. It's like, all right, I'm off the grid for a minute, and it's just like, oh, I need to talk to you immediately. Yeah. So in the case of going back to the data exfiltration piece, and going back and talking about employees, not all employees are bad. In some cases, you have potentially a bad employee. Maybe they got a bad review. They've got root access. They're on the engineering team. They can do some funny stuff with the access that they have. You have a really unique way that you've tied into HR platforms and some other things to be able to completely rip somebody out of Active Directory. So even if I'm doing something I shouldn't be doing, if it gets flagged and the right automation is set around it, I can actually lose all of my access to the company completely. And then I would have to then call security following day, or if I was doing something Friday, Monday morning, and explain to them why this product, your Scion product, ripped me out of Active Directory. And if I was doing something malicious, that would put me in a pretty precarious situation to have to explain why I was doing it. But it would prevent the organization from having any problems with that data being breached. So it's a very unique thing. I know we've talked about in like the case of, I think probably most notably there was the name Edward Snowden. He was an engineer. He had root access to a lot of information, and he was able, as a result of his credentials, having access blanketed across the board, he was able to get into places he shouldn't have been on his spare time and take information out that he should not have been taking out. And that's why he ended up being able to do what he did. Had something like this been in place, that would not have happened, because you would have been able to flag that person's behavior and say, like, why is this guy or girl, whoever, doing the things that they're doing? They shouldn't be in those systems, even though they have access to it. This is a flag that needs to go up and maybe even rip that person out of Active Directory. So that's a very cool thing. I don't know if you have anything to add to that. Something I bring up a lot when talking about security in the Scion product.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a great thing because, he did have credentials to access that data that he was stealing and taking out. but then his behavior was different than it normally is. So that's where it plays in that machine learning and monitoring the behavior. And another great example that we have is a bank we were working with. There was an IT administrator that had root access to all the servers. He was going through one of the servers, and there's a financial folder on there, some M&A information. He was logging into that file, looking at the future M&A for the company, and he was not supposed to be accessing that. When we implemented the Scion platform there, we put the triggers in there. So yes, he has access to get into that server, but he should not. Only these 5 people have access to this folder, or should be accessing this folder. So when he went in and tried to access that information again and look at it, it automatically revoked his credentials across the enterprise. And so that he had to answer to why he was accessing that folder. And, to take it a step further too, we assign a risk score to every individual identity that we're monitoring. And so depending on the risk score, you can put a heightened sensitivity. So if they have more access to sensitive information, their risk score might be higher. So you might have tighter controls and monitors on them. But, to be able to step in and proactively just completely disconnect that person off the network, I think is a powerful tool. And, it's not going to take hours and hours of development to be able to do that. Now, we talked about the Marriott earlier, where those, credentials had access to that information, but it was not normal for them to be exfiltrating 5.2 million records of people's, sensitive information. So it would have picked that up right away and just logged that off. And then the security team would have been able to figure out very quickly that there was steps going on.
Yeah, and that's the difference between 5.2 million records and maybe only a handful. That's a pretty big deal. And so, this is again a very exciting product. I've been very bullish on this in all our security conversations. So I'm very happy that we've been able to spend some time talking about this. Another thing that's been popping up constantly, there's a lot of phishing scams around COVID-19 and the stimulus that was just passed. And so in the case of, even something as simple as, and here's the thing too, it's so crazy about credentials. If I get somebody's credentials, it's not necessarily, and a lot of people don't realize this, I don't want your information. I want your company data. And so that's the difference. I'm not trying to hit you for, $10,000 of ransomware or something like that. Personally, I want your corporate data because I'm going after a much bigger fish. And so in this thing, I can use the COVID-19 panic, the stimulus, the need for the stimulus and the urgency to get that aid to people. I can use that same amount of panic in order to get people to do something they probably shouldn't be doing, but because they're in a panic and they're rushed, they're clicking on things errantly, or they're looking at information they shouldn't be looking at. And just like that, I've been able to get somebody's information. And because of that, I can now get into a system I shouldn't be into. So again, it's not necessarily about just the person and getting your data because I want Bob Weber's information because I want to steal your identity. I want your identity because I want your work information because that's the big play here. I think that gets missed a lot.
Yeah, there are so many. I think the phishing and the scams have increased. I think I saw some report like 300% since all this happened.
It's insane. It's insane how bad this has gotten.
Well, and think about it, password hygiene. How many people, their Facebook credentials, their Facebook password is the same as their work password? There are so many things like that. So if they hijack their personal, might not be the same, but you can figure out a company's corporate, email address. And then if you've already got maybe their Facebook or LinkedIn password, well, most likely you're getting access into their corporate information as well. So how are you going to be able to detect that random user who is logging in from some other country or state or, at a different time of day than normal or, just not normal behavior?
Or even logged in identically at the same time. They could be in your city. In the case of somebody setting up a pineapple at like a coffee shop and ripping someone's credentials, and they could be looking at company data at the same time as the person who just stole their credentials could also be looking at the company data. And that should be a massive red flag. It's like, wait, how is the same person on 2 separate devices looking at different data at the same time? That's a major red flag that needs to be thrown into the air there. So again, it's, there's so many, to go back to the perimeter conversation we were having earlier, there's the perimeter of threat defense has changed from, communications to the mobile device, all the way getting into now. It's like, it really needs to be the identity of the individual that's in the organization. There has to be a way to monitor that. We kind of, it's not the best analogy, but I always talk about the medieval castle. as like a way to visualize that, where you've got multiple multiple throngs of security in order to make sure that people can't get in, all the way from you've got your archers and your catapults, and then you've got your moat around the castle wall, the drawbridge. Like, you're trying to make sure everybody's funneled into one place for control and access, and you've got your palace guards on the inside that are the ones making sure no one's doing any funny business in the interior of the company. That's kind of where I've been like talking about you guys. It's like where something like a Zixer's Imperium would be like the incoming traffic either from email or the mobile device, and then being able to control it from that way. A VPN tunnel like NetMotion, identity access management through another one of our partners, which is identity automation. And then once you actually get in, though, it's like there's no defense. It's really bizarre, but it's like when you're looking at security now, especially in 2020 and moving beyond, the concept of having a one size fits all solution for everything in security is just a miss. It's a massive miss. So that's again not the best analogy, but the one I've been just using is that you guys are the guards interior. The once you get in, even if you've managed to get through all of that, you still need somebody on the inside to make sure that the people that are in there aren't doing anything funny.
Absolutely. And we're never advocating either that you get rid of your traditional security-based, or perimeter-based security. We're an augmentation to that. We come in and we provide an extra layer in that visibility. And it's, because now all of a sudden you've got people outside of the walls of that castle too. So you've got, different people, different remote locations, you've got remote employees, and now your data is at all these different places as well. So how do you further enhance and protect that?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's real fast. I just want to transition to the certifications that you guys have, because you do. I know like a lot of you guys, again, Scion's an amazing product for what you guys do. But what can you tell us about the certifications? Because certain industries, like, you have to be certified before you can play in the industry, and you guys have a ton of applicability in just about every industry. I mean, retail especially. You look at I think you were talking about GDPR the other day when we had a sidebar conversation. DoD, those types of things. The Department of Defense, for obviously, but healthcare. But can you talk a little bit more about the certifications that you guys have, and like where you're able to play, where those are needed?
Yeah, so it's not as much our certifications, but the way we help our clients protect for the compliance certs that they have to have.
Okay.
Like when you look at GDPR or the CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act, there's a lot of they're geared towards protecting the consumer's privacy, but then you have different individuals within your organization that have access to that data. So the scary thing about CCPA that there's still probably a lot of litigation to come out of that, or there is a lot of litigation to come out of that. But there are now financial penalties to having, not having lax security, or having employees to be able to, or somebody go in and breach that data. There can now be financial penalty where the consumer, through a class action lawsuit, can sue them for damages. How do you take that extra layer of protection to say, okay, I am making sure that, okay, these are the people that do have access to that data to protect it, but then making sure that, they're doing with it what they're supposed to be doing. So, when you get into the consumer protection, GDPR, CCPA, we help the companies protect that data from the inside out, make sure that nobody's accessing or doing something they shouldn't be doing with that data, exfiltrating it, and just keeping that other set of eyes on it. Then, you get into different things like, with healthcare. Sometimes in a hospital, you might have 20, 30 different people accessing a single computer on a floor.
Right.
And, and they're using their credentials. And so it's just another layer to be able to monitor what people are doing, how they're behaving within the organization, how they're accessing that patient data, whether it's, in the hospital or in the data center or remote. It's monitoring that. And then even take it a step further, you get into like, the energy and the critical infrastructure. They're covered by NERC compliance, and they have to do quarterly audits on physical and security access. So we've got a way to be able to monitor and, through our, access reviews and access, life cycle, we can monitor who has access to what, how often they're accessing it. And then if somebody's credentials need to be revoked, we can revoke them quickly. I think within 24 hours, if an employee gets terminated, all of their access across the enterprise has to be deleted or they get fined. And so this is, again, just a way to streamline that and help, there's a lot of manual processes in there that we automate and, help eliminate some of the gaps that they can fall under. So it really, somebody asked me before, like, what vertical is best for the platform? And I think really it's any organization that is compliance regulated or, heavily compliant. And then also if you're protecting intellectual property or you have, sensitive data, it's really just protecting that information on the inside.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Yeah, I mean, you guys, you're so applicable to so many verticals. It's really hard to, it'd be nearly impossible to say like you have a sweet spot in one place because of what you guys do. Before we wrap, do you have, again, data exfiltration in 5 clicks or less? Do you have anything in particular that you want to add? Any topics that we didn't cover? Anything in particular?
Yeah, it's just it's interesting to see how the industry's going. Like you said, we try to simplify everything to be able to get to any data on those identities in 5 clicks or less. So whether it's data exfiltration, it's some of the identity and the access roles within the organization. It's credential theft, elevated credentials. You look at a lot of times if somebody's in the HR department, they move to marketing. Well, there's maybe a month or 2 month or 6 month transition because they're still in the company and they're helping out at their old position. And so they're, a year later, they've got full
very common
HR and marketing. Yeah, it happens all the time. And so this is a way to help clean that up, help, kind of close the gaps. So I think it really just gives that enhanced visibility and automation to help companies protect themselves and to do it without, with a very, we feel, nominal investment.
You guys have like I said, I'm super bullish on your product. You have an amazing solution for a lot of organizations could benefit from you guys. But can you talk a little bit about your organization, just a little bit about DefendEdge, and then also some people on your board, because you guys have some massive heavy hitters that I think people should be aware of.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've been around since 2016. We've been the product, the platform started being built about 2.5 years ago. We've actually been GA in production out with customers for a little over a year now. So, the platform isn't brand new. It's been out there. It's been tested. It's running live in production with some great enterprise clients right now. As far as, our team, we all come from an enterprise security background from some form or another. I've got about 20 years in cybersecurity sales and cloud and all of those different pieces and parts. Our COO, which joined us in December, retired Colonel Andre Briere. He spent 30 years in the Air Force in intelligence. He just, his last stint before he joined us, he was the cybersecurity attache to Russia for the United States. So, he's got a, fantastic background. Our CEO, Tasso, he spent quite a few years at Bank of America, rolling out their global data encryption and identity and access management solutions before he, started opening his own company. Louis Borsellino, the other founder, 30 years at the CME, from a finance perspective, trader, great background. And then, from the board of directors, we've got, a couple folks on there, a retired general from the Air Force, a retired admiral. So, and then also, a couple cybersecurity attorneys. So from a background perspective, we've got a great group around us as we continue to build and grow. And, they're helping us, mature quickly. And so, the future's bright with the team that we have built around us.
That's awesome. Yeah. Thank you for that information. Again, it's sometimes newer organizations or products that have never been no one's ever heard of before, don't get a fair shake, like I said earlier. And I just want to make sure that while the product is new, the expertise that you and your organization bring to the table are far from new. And you guys have been steeped in the security world for a very, very long time. So thank you for that. Thank you for that information.
No problem. Thank you.
Absolutely. No, this has been fantastic. Like I said, I'm super bullish on your product. I think it's amazing. It solves for a lot of issues out there in the market. It's a huge simplification for a category that's extremely complex. and difficult for both deployment and understanding. So you guys are very, very needed, especially in small businesses that are still needing compliance, still needing security, and don't have the ability to roll out like a 24/7 SOC. This is a pretty amazing way that they can still deploy a fantastic security solution on the inside of their organization, again, to prevent data exfiltration. I think earlier I said data exfiltration in 5 clicks or less. I want to make this very clear. We're not the ones doing it. We're trying to prevent it. So data exfiltration prevention in 5 clicks or less. Single pane of glass, awesome product. Bob Weber, thank you so much for hanging out with us today and talking about Scion. I sincerely hope anyone watching or listening learned something. I know I always do when I hang out with you. It's always great to see you, and hopefully we'll do it again soon. Thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see you on the internet.